Shalom, this is Beit Bamidbar. My name is Gene, and this is our Wednesday evening online Bible study. Today is the 21st of May, 2025, and we're going into another section of the first chapter of Galatians, and we will kind of get started then. Thank you, Lord, for bringing us together and just help us to study your word and to understand it and help us to um, master it to where we can make use of it and help us with your spirit to ingest and to digest and to use what it is that we have here. Thank you, Lord, for bringing us together. Really appreciate this very much myself. Hashem Yeshua. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, let's go ahead and get here we are. Come on, you can do it. Here we are, bulletin. Okay, get this out the way. Okay. Beit Bamidbar Messianic Outreach. Our website and our phone number is there. He's right there. This is our bulletin for the weekly Shabbat service. So it's dated for a few days from now. So don't be too surprised if the dates that you're seeing are a little bit different than the date of this recording. On Shabbat, it'll be the 28th day of the Omer, and we're counting up from the Sabbath after Pesach, and we'll land at Shavuot just in time for finishing the counting of the Omer. It's amazing how that works out. Mm-hmm. Okay, we do meet on Shabbat at 9:30 in the morning at the Idaho State Veterans Home in Post Falls. If you start driving up now, you can make it in time for the services. Our Shachrit prayer, our Sabbath prayer, what we normally do. Our readings for this week, we already had a couple of weeks, a little while back, of double reading portions. Guess what? This week's reading portion is also a double. And because we finished the book of Leviticus with this reading, we of course chant Chazak, Chazak, V'nit Chazek, be strong, and may we be strengthened when we're done reading. And then finally, at least on this side, continually pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We very much need to be praying for the peace. Things are going crazy and they're getting worse seemingly all the time. So pray for the peace of Jerusalem, pray that God's will be done there, and pray that our country align with God's will in dealing with Jerusalem and with Israel. And so we can have blessings and not God's where were you when they needed you kind of a thing. We don't want to do that. Okay. All right. Our weekly meeting is Wednesdays at 6:30 online, and if you're hearing this, it means you made it. You're on. Okay. An upcoming events, May 26th is Yom Yerushalayim. It's a modern celebration of Jerusalem Day. That'll be coming up on Monday. On Tuesday is Rosh Chodesh Sivan, beginning at so get out and Tuesday evening, howl at the moon if you can see it, and blow your shofar and enjoy your Rosh Chodesh. Then coming up soon now, June 7th, Saturday evening, Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, followed by the next day, the daytime version of Shavuot. In both cases, no regular work. You're supposed to have a day off so you can be at shul. Okay, and later on after that, in the same month, is Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. You'll notice at the, as we go down here, the calendar slows way down through the summer. We don't have a whole lot of stuff going on um, through the summer. Basically, God's calendar is an agricultural calendar, and if you're in agriculture, this is a very busy time of year because you're harvesting and you're planting for your planting and working your crops for the late harvest, and and we're finishing up the early harvest here. Um, in another week, we'll be closing off the barley harvest and beginning the wheat harvest. So you have a sort of a combination of the last part of the tithes coming into the temple, and then with the wheat harvest and the new crops coming in, you would have the first fruits also happening at the same time. Um, so that's the second reason why God asks for us to appear before Him 3 times a year. First one at Pesach, this one coming up at Shavuot, and then at the end of the season in Sukkot, when all the other agriculture is in. You should have all your tithes in by then. And generally speaking, it all comes in. There are some crops that come in. You might still be harvesting later than that, but basically it's done by the time you get to Shavuot, Feast of Weeks. Okay. Any questions, comments, rebukes on our calendar? Okay. Let me close this off. And shalom, Karen.
She said good morning. Did you say?
Yeah, I have to open the thing. Shalom,
Hello,
Rabbi.
shalom, Rabbi.
Shalom, sister.
Shalom.
And Art. I know Art
Hello.
is on
Yeah,
there.
arch to the
Yes.
side.
Yes.
Okay. Um, Continuing on our third section of Galatians chapter 1. Let's go ahead and let me kind of warm up on the topic here. We begun with Shaul, Paul in English, reminding everybody who he is to the Galatian congregations. Galatia was not a city per se, but a region in the middle of what is now modern day Turkey. Galatia at this time was generally inhabited by Celts. Yeah, Celts. They came in from Eastern Europe and settled down in the area what is now modern Turkey, and then were later pushed out and moved up through Europe and ended up in England and Ireland and Scotland. And Celts are most known these days for being Irish and Scots and so on. But that's all later in the future. Right now, they're hanging out here in Galatia. Okay, Paul is continuing in his sort of an introduction for himself. Obviously, he was known to at least a few congregations, but he's writing to a wider audience. So there might be some people in congregations that don't know Paul. Shaul is Hebrew, Paul is English. I'll use them interchangeably. So he's kind of explaining who he is, and in some ways setting straight the record in case somebody's been saying something incorrect about Paul. He's setting himself straight. And part of what he's trying to explain here is that his zeal for God was such that he drove himself to doing all sorts of crazy things, such as persecuting the people of the way, which is one of the early names for the Messianic community. And in the process of going to chase down more people to arrest them and bring them into Israel to try them as heretics, Yeshua knocks him off his donkey and off his horse, excuse me, and becomes an instant convert to the Messiah for some reason. I think if Yeshua were to knock us down, in the middle of us doing something, I think we would probably all pay attention pretty well. Okay, so let's continue on in verse 10 of chapter 1. It says, Now, does that sound as if I were trying to win human approval? No, I want God's approval, or that I'm trying to cater to people. If I were still doing that, I would not be a servant of the Messiah. So he's still in this explanation of who he is and what he's doing and why he's doing. Um, and so he's doing a counter argument for himself to talk about that he was well, actually we're going to get into that bit, that he was so zealous for God that he was even persecuting the community of believers in Yeshua on the impression that they were heretics. Okay. Um, okay, so why win? Is he trying to win human approval? Um, the Greek there is patho, literally to bind. It means to persuade, to make friends, to tranquilize, to listen to, or to obey. My commentary on that is, who am I working for, men or God? And that's when part of what you always have to look at when you're trying to figure out if somebody's right or they're not right. Who are they working for? Are they trying to please people, or are they trying to please God? Or are they, pushing for what God wants or pushing for what people want? Okay. And let's see. Okay, to cater. Let's see. I think, yeah, I'm not, or that I'm trying to cater to people. So, what does it mean to cater? Um, Resco in the Greek, it means to please, to strive to please, to accommodate oneself to the opinions, desires, and interests of others. Um, Manipulators will do that a lot. They'll find out what your interests are, and then they'll try to align themselves with your interests to get you to follow them, to think really well of them. Um, the difficulty for us as believers um, is that we can't be um, caterers, so to speak. We can't be catering to people. Rather, we need to show what is truth and what is God's way, and um, press for that to be the norm for everybody. Now, that's not going to make us friends with everybody, but it does make us doing the right thing in God's eyes. Okay. Perhaps from the Midrashic tradition, traditional interpretation of serving a master is pleasing or angering either God or one's evil inclination, no one being able to simultaneously serve two masters. Okay. Um, so within the tradition of explaining about things as being either pleasing to God or angering to God, um, it's also applicable to um, one's own master in the flesh. And the master, it can be used very broadly for anything from somebody who has a position of authority over you, like a boss, or even coworkers. Um, and so the terminology is the same. And in traditional interpretation, you're either pleasing God or you're angering God with what you're doing. And they give you those two options when you're talking about halakha, talking about how to live a daily life um, according to God's way. And that sounds a little bit like Matthew 6:24. Leave your gift where it is by the altar and go and make peace with your brother. Then come back and offer your gift. This is the condition that if you have a gift to bring to the altar, but you remember that you need to set something straight with your brother, a fellow believer, leave your gift at the altar, and go and make peace. Then you can offer your gift with a clean conscience and with um, you're not going to have to make God, deal with the fact that you're looking for his pleasure, but on the other hand, you just annoyed somebody else considerably, and they're probably complaining to God too. What this guy? What did you wait? Why did he do that to me? So, um, servant in Greek, doulos, which means servant. Um, little commentary from Jewish New Testament commentary, Dr. Stern. Shaul was evidently being accused by certain other Messianic Jews of trying to win human approval, in this case, Gentile approval, by setting forth an easy gospel which did not demand that Gentiles become Jews and thus be required to observe the Torah as non-Messianic Judaism understands it. And as considerable numbers of Messianic Jews were practicing it. Shaul responds to establish from Shaul's response is to establish from the start the dichotomy between winning human approval and winning God's approval. One cannot aim at both, and Shaul's interest is only in the latter, compared to, say, Romans 2:29, or emphasize a different side of it. If Shaul catered to people, he would not, in fact, um, uh, indeed, that's a mistype there, not possibly be a servant of the Messiah, since no less than God the Father, the Messiah demands exclusive loyalty. Okay, so that's a commentary from Dr. Stern on this, and it's an interesting one. In speaking to the Messianic communities where he's writing, that he's visited, and to whom he's writing this letter, um, he's made the case that you don't need to convert to the Judaism of that day in order to be approved by God. And we'll get into that in more detail as we get further. And that, however, you do need to follow God's commandments. And that's where the other half of the argument often goes astray as well. Some people think because we're not required to be orthodox, it's therefore free game for us to disobey any of God's instructions as we will. And that's not the case either. So we'll get into that more as we go further into the book. Okay, any questions, comments, rebukes so far? Okay. Verse 11. Furthermore, let me make clear to you, brothers, that the good news as I proclaim it is not a human product. Okay. Brethren, adelphos, in Greek, Hebrew, achim, usually used by Jews speaking to Jews, but Shaul has indicated all believers are brothers, such as in Ephesians 2:14. For he himself is our shalom. He has made us both one and has broken down the mechitza which divided us. The mechitza was a curtain between the two sides of the congregation, which at various different times was dividing the congregation for two different reasons. In a modern Orthodox shul, you'll have a mechitza to keep the boys separated from the girls. I think it was in Colossians or Ephesians, this comes up again, was talking about the Gentiles being on one side of the congregation while the Jews were on the other side of the congregation with this mechitza in between. And Paul's argument was that Yeshua himself has broken down that mechitza between us to where we're all one congregation. We're not divided. And so Paul is consistent in his description here by saying, it's okay for him to use the term brothers for fellow believers in Yeshua, even though it's cultural, more common just between Jews. But in his case, because he's proclaiming and teaching that Gentiles are acceptable to God as Gentiles, we are all brothers because we all believe in the same Messiah. Okay, and this again is not a human a human device. It's not a human construct, but rather it's something that God has designed. And if we read this all the time, especially when we're going through our Torah reading. The God's design was for the nations to come and join into Israel and to be considered part of native to Israel. The qualification being that you follow God's commandments, you keep the Torah commandments, and that your proof of your belonging to God is your obedience to God's commandments. Okay. The gospel, okay. Evangelion. Sorry, it's all Greek to me. Good tidings. Okay. He says he has preached again. Now, the gospel is the good news. Preached is the same word, but used in an active form. It means to announce good tidings, to evangelize. Okay. The Hebraic idiom to use the same word as a verb and a noun in the same sentence. Actually, yes, it is. I wrote it as a question mark, but yes, it is. It's normal. There's a lot of there's a lot of play on words that goes on in Hebrew, and so it's not unusual then for Paul, a Jewish guy who reads Torah, is going to be using word puns as well, or using a similar word, a different version of the same word in two different uses. Okay, so this is the good news that Shaul taught was not based on human wisdom or desire. So again, he's saying what he was teaching, what he is teaching, comes from God, and it's God breathed. It's God's message, and it's for us to learn. And in this case, he was the teacher to the congregations around Galatia. Because neither did I receive it from someone else, nor was I taught it. It came through a direct revelation from Yeshua the Messiah. And we all know that that moment of Paul's awakening, as it were, when he was riding on the way to Antioch, and he gets knocked off his horse and directly challenged by Yeshua. And Shaul wisely acknowledges who he's dealing with. And Yeshua said, don't worry, I got a lot of stuff for you to do. Go into Antioch and you'll be told what to do from there. Okay, so he received and he was taught. Didasko means to teach, to instruct, discourse. It's actually the same functional use as the word Torah. He was taught, and it was by revelation, apocalypsis, meaning laying bare or making naked, fully exposing. And so Paul is claiming that he didn't learn what he learned from somebody else, but he learned it from God. He learned it from, he spent, was it 2 years, 3 years, 4 years in Arabia just studying, just after he met Yeshua. So he's, by the time he got out of there, he had his understanding pretty well worked out. Okay. And another commentary, the good news as I proclaim it was revealed directly, compared to 2 verse 2, by the risen Yeshua. The fact that it is not a human product and that neither did he receive it from someone else, nor was he taught it, means that he had no reason to try to win the approval or to cater to his teachers, like he said in verse 10. For those who had been his teachers, Rabban Gamliel, which we know out of Acts 22:3. And other non-Messianic Jews had taught him something very different. And we'll get to that when we're looking at the next couple of verses. Okay, questions, comments, rebukes so far? Okay, let's move on to verse 13. For you have heard about my former way of life in traditional Judaism. Notice that's in brackets. It's not in the text, but in order to differentiate what we call Messianic Judaism and what is in modern days is called Rabbinic Judaism or traditional Judaism. Um, uh, the translator, I think that's still Dr. Stern on this one, threw in the insertional traditional to make sure it's understood to be different than Messianic. I did my best to persecute God's Messianic community and destroyed it. Ew. Okay. In Judaism, Yodiosmos, religion of the Jews. Okay, Judaism. That's the Greek word there. In this context, first century Judaism, and more specifically, Phariseeism, is identified by the phrase "my former conduct." In other words, before all this, he was, he was number one in his class um, in Phariseeism. Okay, so he's an expert in Pharisaism, and he was very much in that, and that's what he was trying to force all the Messianics to return to, is to Pharisaic Judaism of that day. Okay, the church, or Greek ecclesia, the Hebrew is kehilah, um, specifically the assembly of God, um, the believers in Messiah. Okay, so Kehillah, ecclesia, they're identical words, different languages. Okay, and then he was beyond measure, kata hyperbole. If you know what hyperbole means, you'll never, 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 never catch that. Never, sorry, bad joke. In largest measure, exaggerated beyond limits to the extreme. Okay, he tried to destroy, or porteo, to lay waste, to sack, to ravage. Okay, so he sought to destroy the Messianic Judaism because it wasn't his form of Pharisaism. Okay, and so he that's what we read in the book of Acts. He was chasing after people and doing bad things. Okay, uh, verse 14. And how, since I was more of a zealot for the traditions handed down by my forefathers than most Jews my age, I advanced in traditional Judaism more rapidly than they did. Okay, um, so his zeal was for the traditions handed down by the fathers, or the progenitors of the Pharisaism. Um, so that's where his zeal was, and what's interesting is he doesn't say his zeal was for Torah, but his zeal was for Pharisaism. Okay. And thus he advanced in Judaism. Okay, prokopto en Judaismos, from a Hebraic idiom, uh, said holech vechazek, walk and strengthen, meaning to become strong and great in knowledge among the Jews. Okay, in other words, frum to the max. Okay, frum is Yiddish. It means that you're observant in every detail you possibly can. Um, and so it's just identifying someone who's really picky about keeping the commandments. It's said that he's frum, and um, it wasn't necessarily uncommon um, in those times when people were looking for a mate through the newspaper ads, the Lonely Hearts column. Um, Someone would be put up in their description that they were frum, meaning that they were traditionally observant. And so if somebody was not interested in being frum, you would not, contact that person because, you don't want to be connected with somebody who wants to be frum when you don't want to be. And if you're frum, you don't want to be connected to someone who doesn't want to be. So, Shaul was more of a zealot. He advanced more in the traditions, um, more than his compatriots did, his contemporaries. Okay, he was exceedingly zealous, uh, perisoteros zelotes, more abundantly burning with zeal. Okay, from the traditions of the father, paradosis mo patrikos, Pharisaic Judaism. Notice it's not Torah. Okay, there's a difference between Pharisaism and Torah observance. Pharisaism starts with the basis of a Torah, but then they alter and adjust, add to or take away by their tradition from the written Torah, God's commandments that we have in our Bibles. And so, in fact, modern Judaism does that a lot too. There's a lot of stuff that's added and there's stuff that's taken away. Um, and so you see in this that Paul was so focused on his Pharisaism, um, that he was probably missing a lot of important detail. Frankly, basically kindness and patience and long suffering with people who are not yet up to that level of observance. Um, okay, another commentary from Jewish New Testament. The second measure of Shaul's zeal for traditional Judaism was how rapidly he advanced in it. In this, he had every advantage, such as what he says in Philippians 5, verses 5 and 6, chief of which was that he studied with the leading teacher of Israel at the time, Rabban Gamliel, under whom he was trained in every detail of Torah. Oops. For our fathers. And Rabban Gamliel is very, very highly prized teacher, even in modern times. And he's heavily quoted in the Mishnah and in the Talmud. So he was a student under this guy. So you can imagine the high stature that Shaul had with that. Okay. The phrase, the traditions handed down by my forefathers, means the oral Torah as set forth by the Prushim, the Pharisees, comparing Matthew 15:2, 6, and Mark 2:13. Whereas the similar phrase in Acts 22:3, by using the word Torah instead of traditions, includes the written Torah as well. And that's part of the confusion that goes in the terminology in this letter and people interpreting it, is parsing out the difference between when Paul starts using the word law, does he mean Torah or does he mean traditions, Pharisaism, or both? And that's one of those areas which made perfect sense to Paul when he was writing it, but kind of leaves us guessing because we're not as connected um, to the lifestyle and the issues that Paul was living and teaching about when he was running around Galatia. So be forewarned, there could be some room for consternation as to exactly what he meant when he talks about law. And when we get into it further down, you can see where some people take the word law and assume it only means Torah and say that Paul is against the Old Testament, and which is completely far from the truth. But rather, his issues are dealing with the man-made traditions that have either adapted or eliminated God's written Bible. Okay, so let's see. Okay, let me go back and do some of this again. That's one big long sentence. Okay. Um, by using the word Torah instead of traditions includes the written Torah as well. Shaul's point here is that speaking of the oral Torah, which includes many rules that not mentioned in the written Torah, maybe to show that he himself was far more observant than every legalist he opposes in this letter. Okay. So he's sort of setting himself up as the expert as to why you shouldn't be following the man-made traditions, or at least not regarding them as equal to God's written commandments. Okay. Um, through this, in this, you'll find from time to time I'll recommend something that comes from tradition because it can be good to use. All right, and so we have the freedom to look at what tradition says and to decide whether or not it's good. It's tradition to light the candles before Sabbath arrives. Okay. Personally, I find this a great tradition because it sets our hearts and our minds on the idea, makes a demarcation point that the work week is over, Sabbath begins. We made it. We're safe. Okay. Um, Shaul's reason for advancing more says, wait, that is the most Jesus says. The zeal for the oral Torah of this outstanding yeshiva bucher was in keeping with his having been a parush, which he explains in Acts and Philippians. Shaul had always been ambitious. What changed after he met Yeshua was the direction of his ambition. Okay, so it's a little Yiddish there, yeshiva bucher. Yeshiva is a school, a rabbinic school, and Bucher it's a German root. Buch is a book in English. The thing you open up and read. So calling it, and it's not someone attending yeshiva would either refer to himself or be referred to as a yeshiva bucher because usually got his face in a book all the time. They're always studying. Okay, and it's sometimes used as a negative context. Sometimes it's used as a positive context. You got to look at the context to figure out what the meaning on that would be. Okay, but Shaul was always ambitious. Okay. Okay. Paul, his advancement in non-Messianic Judaism probably included both stricter observance to the details of its law, being more froom, to use the Yiddish term derived from the German fromm, which means pious, and faster promotion in its communal life. So uh, Paul would have been a real fast up and coming kind of a gentleman, and he would be known um, um, would be known by being, he'd be the guy to go to. He'd be the one that you wanted on your team when you're having your Bible verse memorization contest. You always want to be on Paul's team because he always wins. In saying this, Shaul identifies with the zeal of those who are presenting the not good gospel because he used to be like them. However, Shaul continues his story to show how he got turned away from traditional Judaism to Messianic Judaism. And so the question would be, how does this happen? Tune in next week. You'll get the full story. So we're going to leave Paul on the train tracks, tied up with the train coming, and we'll come back next week and talk about this. Okay. Any questions, comments, rebukes? That's our study for the day. Okay. Let's go ahead and close it up. Oops, where am I? looking at two screens. I'm spending my time looking at the wrong one. Okay, there we are. Shalom, kids. Good to see you.
Hello.
Okay, any last chance at questions, comments, rebukes?
Anybody else there?
Yeah, we're all here. We're all together. Okay, let me close off the recording. Shalom, y'all.